Sup guys, in this video I'll be going over the datamine of the new Sardinia event, Paradiso of Shackled Light. Or is it actually an Egyptian event? Let's find out. If you haven't seen the datamine already, you can find a link to it in the description. I think all of the ship details are up on the wiki already though. I'll only be highlighting the parts of the kits that stand out to me and giving you my opinions on the strengths and weaknesses of the ships, so you'll have to look through the datamine yourself if you want to see every little detail. At the end, I'll also briefly cover the new skins. With that out of the way, let's just get right into it. First up is the new UR battleship, Raffaello. While there's a lot of flavor text in her skills with the black and white paints, I tried my best to summarize what her skills will actually do in battle. First, you should always have at least one black paint applied from your lead vanguard ship, likely two if it's a destroyer or light cruiser. Then, the slot 1 weapon for most main fleet ships should be able to apply a stack quite reliably. For example, if you're using a triple gun on a battleship, each shell has a 50% chance to apply one stack, so 3 would have an 87.5% chance. However, you do also have to consider accuracy and physical hit rate as well, so the odds are going to be lower, but across 3 salvos you'll have 9 chances. If you're using battleships with twin guns like the 457 though, it might not be so reliable. With carriers, the reliability will depend on how many planes they have in their first slot. For example, Aquila has 2 slots, and if you're running regular fighters, like the Pancakes, they will only hit 2 bombs on a single target on average, so the chance that it will miss out on applying the paint will be like 20 to 30%. However, if you're using a carrier with 4 planes in their first slot like Fritz Rume, and then giving them rocket fighters with 46 rockets each, then they will almost certainly apply a stack. In the best case scenario, the enemy will already have 2 stacks from the lead vanguard ship, and then the first main fleet ship that attacks will apply a 3rd one, activating the debuff. The skill also has a 5% slow per stack, but you can pretty much ignore that, as it's too weak even at max stacks to make much of a difference. Additionally, since the stacks are independent of each other, this means that at 3 stacks, it will just be capped and you won't be able to refresh the stacks, meaning that it's guaranteed to drop back to 2 stacks after at most 10 seconds. This is a good thing because it seemed, based on the wording, that the stacks don't do much aside from the negligible slow, and it's the process of changing from 2 stacks to 3 stacks that applies the extra damage taken debuff. You could keep a pretty high uptime on the debuff if you set your fleet up in a way such that when the first stack runs out, you're able to immediately apply a new stack that brings it back up to 3 stacks and reapply the debuff. For her second skill, allied ships gain white paint at the start of battle when they lose 20% HP, or defeat enemies that have black paint applied to them. Every time a ship gets a stack of white paint, they also gain a 1% HP shield, which is about 100% HP since it scales off Raffaello's HP. Like the black paint, the white paint stacks are also independent and temporary. It seems like it would be extremely difficult to guarantee having 3 stacks, unless you're constantly defeating enemies that have black paint applied, which would be quite difficult to do in boss fights. In campaign though, 3 stacks shouldn't be very difficult to maintain. Her last skill has a barrage that procs on her main gun shots and has other effects, depending on the paint stacks on the field. If there's any ship on the field that has 3 stacks of white paint, she will heal the lowest HP ship in the fleet for 2% of Raffaello's max HP 4 times. As she has about 10k HP, this will be a 800 total HP heal, targeted toward the ship that needs it the most. This heal, combined with her shields, will be very significant, especially if you're running low HP vanguards. And then, depending on the black paints, her barrage gets damage bonuses in the form of critical buffs as well as just bonus damage. I'll try to summarize everything once since it's quite difficult, but essentially, you don't have to worry about black paint much. It will probably be applied automatically, but white paint is only going to be maintained reliably if you're consistently defeating enemies with black paint. Enemies with 3 black paint stacks will take increased damage, and if an enemy on the field has black paint, Raffaello's Barrage will be empowered. Allies with 3 white paint stacks will receive a damage buff, but if an ally has 3 white paint stacks, she also becomes a very real, reliable healer. Looking at her Barrage, what immediately stands out is the fact that the highest total damaging portion consists of straight shells and not arcing shells. These are not targeted and do not penetrate shields, similar to the shelling that you'll find on the big 7 barrages. This means that her single target damage will suffer, but having more AoE should make her more effective than most UR battleships in campaign. Personally, I feel like they dropped the ball a bit on her skills. I think it's totally fine that she's campaign-oriented, as opposed to directly competing with a plethora of single-target-focused UR battleships that we already have, but there are some issues that I want to point out. First, she's the most RNG-heavy out of pretty much all the UR ships. I've already talked extensively in other videos about how RNG skills only make things inconvenient, as players can just restart battles until the RNG lines up. They had a really good streak going on with all the other Rainbow ships released thus far, so I don't know why they're adding RNG to Raffaello now. They can easily keep the black and white paint mechanics, but I can't see the reason behind making the black paint not 100% chance to apply on hit. It's not like the debuff is particularly broken. When you look at another ship like Alsace, for example, who already has higher personal damage, and her debuff is 12%, which works for all ships equally, and is much easier to apply as well. Relying on getting kills to keep the white paint stacks going is a zero-sum game where the ships in your fleet will be fighting for the last hit. A 6% damage buff is granted at 3 white paint stacks for non-Sardinia ships, which isn't very significant, and you can't even control whether or not your strongest ship is the one that gets it. This kind of RNG, or inconsistency, should be a trade-off for extremely powerful skill effects, but here it's just strictly a detriment with no real payoff. I haven't mentioned yet that both her damage taken increased debuff and damage buff from paints are doubled for Sardinia ships, coming in at a hefty 12% from each. Unfortunately, the only good Sardinia vanguard at the moment is Napoli, who only has a single main gun mount and a heavy cruiser gun at that, so it's a poor choice for keeping stacks of black paint on the enemy. Aside from the paint synergy, Napoli also offers nothing in the form of anti-air or anti-submarine, which are crucial in late game chapters. Using Napoli, even if receiving the extra buffs from Raffaello, is not going to be anywhere as good as just using the likes of Laffy 2 or Z52, who can take care of the extra stuff like anti-air and anti-submarine on top of tanking. In the main fleet, since she's really built for campaign, the only Sardinia ship I'd consider alongside her would be Aquila. But Aquila only has 2 planes in her first slot, and therefore is also a poor choice if you want reliable black paint stacks. Their roles overlap quite a bit as well, and it might end up being too much healing and not enough damage if you use them together. It could end up being a better option to forego Aquila altogether, and just use Raffaello as your secondary healer, but we'll have to see. Other options like Littorio and the Zara classes are too weak even with a 24% extra damage. And finally, there's the issue that plagues every bulky battleship that should theoretically be good in campaign. While Raffaella herself is extremely hard to take out, she doesn't cover for your other main fleet ships, who would in all likelihood be much squishier. So there's nothing that she can do if they are the ones getting targeted instead. Her healing will mitigate some of that, of course, but it's probably not enough to out-heal the battlecruiser enemies in Chapter 15. While she should be able to steamroll escort and carrier nodes easier than Musashi, she won't be as reliable against the hardest battleship nodes without Musashi's main fleet protection. You could also experiment with using her as the secondary healer alongside a primary healer of Unicorn or maybe Zuiho, and then removing the need for Aquila or Volga and bringing a more powerful and bulky third ship instead, but I don't know if that would be an upgrade overall. Okay, I think I've made my stance clear by now. I don't think Raffaello will be particularly strong in content like meta fights, Operation Siren boss fights, challenge mode, and so on, due to her barrage being spread out. and her white paints relying on defeating enemies. Instead, she has the potential to be something like a better Aquila in campaign. If she ends up being very good, it will be definitely off the back of the heals and shields, and not because of the damage output. Whether or not she will be better than Musashi for Chapter 15 will need to be tested. Next up is the new submarine, Baraka. Her buffs start out very weak and then stack up through different ways. The issue is, her buffs, even when fully stacked, aren't that much more powerful than that of the other submarines that get everything up front, and definitely not even close to being enough to make up for how weak she is when first summoned into battle, kinda like Regigigas. Her saving grace is that, as long as she has over 30% HP, she will fire a decently strong barrage every 5 seconds. This is going to make her break everything, and testing will be needed to see if the barrage's hit rate is good enough to make up for her being very weak in the beginning. The other new SSR ship in this event is Andrea Doria Meta. She's a very solid and reliable battleship who is particularly good at dealing with ramming ships. A perfect fit for Chapter 14, where she should be one of the best options out of all the gold battleships. Unfortunately, meta ships are not part of their original faction, so she will not benefit from the bonus effects in Raffaello's skills. Of all the factions, I feel like Sardinia needs the most amount of ships to round out their faction, so I really wish we could have gotten another Sardinia ship here and saved the metas for IJN or another faction with a much higher ship count. Something like another SSR Capitani Romani class destroyer would have been nice. I've looked over the 2 purple ships and nothing in particular stands out from a gameplay perspective, but the light cruiser does give firepower fleet tech at level 120. Alright, we also have a new SAP Rainbow Battleship gun as well. If you watched my in-depth guide on battleship guns, this is probably as easy of a gun as it gets to evaluate for yourself. If you haven't seen the guide yet, check the playlist in the description. It is by far the strongest battleship gun against medium armor, heavily power creeping all other existing battleship guns, and that is without any caveats. Against the other 2 armor types, it is quite unremarkable. That's pretty much all there is to really say. Okay, now for the real highlight of this event, the skins. As an expert in Egyptian mythology, I'm going to do an analysis of each of the skins and the deity they're based on. First up is Raffaello, who's based on the Egyptian goddess Isis as indicated by her headpiece. Isis is known for, well, looking at Raffaello, being sexy and having a gold anklet, I guess. Next is Baraka. This skin is definitely based on the goddess Bastet, based on the cat ears. Bastet is apparently known for having the roundest butt and softest tits. Next up is Corleone, who is based off of Queen Cleopatra, often depicted with a cobra tiara. Cleopatra is known for her childbearing hips and stirrups, and just overall being sexy and seductive. Next is Carducci, who I think is just a dancer, but you can see the Eye of Horus right over here. I don't think she's supposed to be Horus though. Next up is Chion, who is based on the goddess Tefnut. Tefnut is, as you can see, known for her incredibly voluptuous body and foot jewelry. Last but certainly not least is Scylla skin, which is based on the god of death and the underworld, Anubis. This is the one I worship, and hopefully I'll be paying her a visit soon. I was right to skip out on her other skins and wait for this one, because holy shit. Anyway, this is easily one of my favorite skin themes in the game. I hope we'll be getting more where they came from. It doesn't necessarily have to be Egyptian gods. Skins like the Kaga Dancer and Gloucester's RPG boss skins have the same kind of vibe. Goddesses, witches, and succubi are all welcome by me. Despite the ships being a little bit weak overall, and the battleship gun being kind of unbalanced, I can't say that I'm disappointed in the event just because of the quality of these skins. Anyway, that's all I have to say for this event. I'm curious to see if the skins will be as well received by the general player base as they are by me. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.